Okay. Good morning, children. We will go ahead with the Vedic civilization. In the last class, we learned about the composition of the epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, who wrote them, and what was the story about, and what did we learn from these, what information do we get about the Vedic period from these epics. So this is where we stopped. So we will continue now. Yeah. So we ended with the importance of ethics. So how are they important? Because they give us the information about the political, social, and economic life of the art. So political means what was the government, the king, his ministers. I mean, how did they rule? Okay, what was the form of government at that time? Social structure talks about the classes in society, the caste system, or what were the occupations, uh, and what was the culture, and what did they do what were their daily activities, what did they eat, how did they dress. All this is part of social. And economic life again talks about the occupations and how did they earn their livelihood. Now, all this information we can get from the epics. Then it also talks about the Aryan kingdoms. There were many Aryan kingdoms like Kosala, Avanti, Videha. These were some of the Aryan kingdoms that were there at that time. So we come to know about which were the Aryan kingdoms that existed at that time. What were the arms and weapons they used, and the caste system. So we also come to know that the Kshatriyas were the warrior class or the ruling class, and the Kshatriyas, they believed that death on the battlefield was a very noble act. So it was like, if you die on the battlefield, you go to heaven. So they were fearless in that way, and uh, it was an honor for them to die on the battlefield. Then literary and philosophical value. It is these kind of epics, is like, it was done once and it can never be replicated. We can never dream of writing stories or epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. So they have great literary and philosophical value. Philosophical value because we learn a lot of valuable lessons from these epics. So it has a lot of philosophical value. Family life and values of Aryans. So the Aryans, what was their family life like? Who was the head of the family? What were the rules by which they lived? And then what were the values that they cherished? All these things we come to know. And the morals and principles, of course. Uh, the heroic deeds of the Aryans. And we know that the Aryans lived by very high morals and principles. So if you see the story of Rama, you come to know that Rama was so obedient. He was the most obedient son. So he never crossed his father's word, and he was most respectful towards his guru and very kind towards his subjects. So all these kind of morals and principles we learn. And the Bhagavad Gita, which is contained in Mahabharata, it is such a great book. I call it the textbook of life, because it teaches us how to be happy. So it is relevant even today. If we understand the Gita, we will be able to, live our life in a more balanced and happy way, where we'll be able to face the challenges of life uh, in a much more confident manner. Okay, so it has the karma philosophy, which talks of deeds, the deeds and actions of man and the consequences of those actions, and the immortality of the soul. How the soul never dies, but it is only the body that is dying. So when somebody dies, it is the body, physical body, which perishes, but the soul or the energy which is within the body continues to remain, and probably it takes the birth as another person and gets the rebirth and is born again. So these are some of the things that we come to know from the epics. Now, going ahead, we already know that from the early Vedic period, by the time the later Vedic period started, iron was already discovered. Early Vedic people were nomadic. They only, their main occupation was domestication of cows, and they moved from place to place. At best, they did shifting agriculture because they didn't have the tools which were required. Okay, they didn't have the kind of and the rivers also were shifting their course in the early Vedic period. So because of all these various reasons, the Aryans never settled in one place. But by the time the later Vedic period started, iron was also discovered, and with that, Aryans also started settling down in one place, and they started uh, living in one place in communities. Okay, they left their nomadic way of life, and in this transition iron was very, very important. So it was discovered around 1000 BC in India. Then what was the advantage of using iron? The advantage was iron was a stronger metal. It was available in plenty. There were a lot of iron deposits. So it was also cheaper. Since it was available in plenty, it was a metal which was cheaper than other metals that was known to man at that time. And it was found in large areas. It was so strong and it was so, what do you say? It could be used in various ways. So that is why iron was one of the main reasons why the Aryans settled down, and their occupation also changed from being just nomadic people, domestication of cows, to agriculture. They started doing agriculture, proper agriculture. So by the time the Aryans had also reached the Gangetic plain, Yamuna Ganga plains, from the Sapta Sindhu region, they had reached the Gangetic plains. And this area was very fertile, and it was very ideal for agriculture. So how was iron used? In what all professions was it used? What occupations was iron used? First, it was used in agriculture. How? New implements like sickles, hoes, plow heads, etc. were made using iron. So sickle is a semicircular sort of implement, okay? And plow heads, we know, plow heads are the curved, digging implements which are used to dig the soil so that we can put seeds into the soil. So the plow heads, the sickles, all these things were made using iron. And because of this, people could, harvest crops in greater quantities. So the production of rice, wheat, and barley increased a lot. Now, what are the other occupations? New occupations also came about because of the discovery of iron. Because we have chisel, saw, hammer, nail, hammers and nails, and etc. All these tools gave rise to occupations like carpentry, weaving, spinning, tool making. So making these iron tools itself was an occupation. Plus using these tools, now there was another occupation called carpenters, who would make furniture, who would make pillars, who would make artistic things using wood. And then spinning, yarn, weaving, all these things became well-defined occupations. After that, we also have the use of iron in defense. So in defense, war weapons like swords, armors, shields, etc. were made. Okay. So all these things help the Aryans to defend themselves very well in case of any fights or any wars. Okay. Next, we come to pottery. This was also well developed, and how the Aryan civilization progressed and how the pottery changed as the civilization progressed? How did the pottery change? This is what we can know. First was the Grey Ware period or the GW period. The Grey Ware period was during the Rigvedic period, which is the early Vedic age. So it was simple clay pottery, which was gray color. Gray colored clay was used to make pots and pans. Okay, so that is the Grey Ware period. Slowly they started making painted grey ware. So by the time later Vedic period started, they shifted from grey ware to painted grey ware. Now, what is this painted grey ware? It was grey colored clay which was made into pots and pans, but now they started drawing designs with black. Okay, geometric and floral designs were drawn. And not only that, this particular pottery was also smooth and it was much more, polished. So the quality was good. It was very smooth pottery and it was also decorated with black paint. And the kind of designs that were used were mostly floral and geometric designs. So this was the painted grey ware period. So PGW period corresponds with the later Vedic period. Then slowly this gave rise to another kind of pottery called the Northern Black Polished Ware. Now what is this NBPW? NBPW was black colored pottery. So some black clay is being used to make this pots, but it was highly glossy and shiny. This pottery was very glossy, very shiny, and that is why this was more expensive. And probably this was used only by the affluent classes, the rich classes in those days. So on the basis of pottery also we know how the civilization as it evolved, what were the changes in the pottery. Then the origin of Aryans we have already discussed, but it is still open to debate and question. There is no conclusive theory regarding the origin of Aryans. There is no single concurrence on this topic because many people have different theories. Some say that they are actually natives of Indians. Some say they have come from Arctic region. Some say no, they have come from the Saptasindhu region. Now, this is the area where the Harappan civilization was there, and this is the Saptasindhu region. So, some say that from there only the Aryans came. And some people say, no, they came from Tibet. Some people say they came from, all this area, Tibet and Nepal, this area they came. But the most widely accepted theory is Max Muller's theory. What Max Muller believed was that Aryans came from Central Asia. So you can see this is Central Asia. Okay. From here the Aryans came. This is what Max Muller believes. He says that the Aryan gene pool is it's a common genetic pool where people lived here. And from here, as the population increased, they started expanding or they started migrating to different regions in different parts. So some of them reached Europe and some of them reached India, this way, east and west. So that is the Aryan race. That is what Max Muller believes. Okay. And we also know that Hitler believed that the Germans were also descendant of the Aryan race. So he also was very proud of the Aryan race and the superiority of the Aryan race. Right? Now, why do people believe that Max Muller's theory is the best theory among all the other theories? That is because in the Rig Veda, there is mention of certain types of plants and animals which are actually found in Asia Minor. Okay, this area from where the Aryans are believed to have come. Plus, if you see the description of the Aryan people, their physical features, their genetic traits, etc., that closely resembles the people who lived in Asia Minor. So that is why we believe that, they only must have migrated and have come to India. But this is still under dispute, so we still don't have any conclusive theory about the origin of. Initially, the Aryans came and they attacked the Harappans. So the Harappan civilization declined and they settled down on the banks of the Indus River, and slowly they started migrating and they came to the Yamuna Ganga basin, and they occupied this entire region. So this is what this map shows my the extent of the early and Vedic, later Vedic civilizations. Now let's go to the comparative study. This is the most important part of your of this lesson, especially from an examination point of view. This is a very important part where where all the questions are related to comparison of the early and later Vedic period on the basis of society, on the basis of economy, on the basis of religion. How were they different? So this is the most important part. Now, if we see the political part, that is the form of government, earlier in the early Vedic period, they were just tribes. The Aryans were just tribes, and these tribes were called Janas. They lived in villages, and these Janas elected their own leader. So the leader was not, leader's position was not hereditary. It was a republic form of government where the people of the tribe, they elected their leader and they called him the Rajan. And now the Rajan was advised by two groups of people who were called the Sabha and the Samiti. The Sabha was a smaller group, and it was a group of wise elders, elderly people in the village or in the society who had a lot of experience. They would advise the Rajan, and that was the Sabha. And it was a small group. And Samiti was a big assembly of all the people probably in the village, where on certain occasions, not always, sometimes the entire village was called or they congregated in one place, maybe to discuss and debate upon certain important issues. So that was called the Samiti. Now, in the Samiti, women also took part and they voiced their opinion and they were quite active and vocal in these gatherings. Okay. And the king's position was not ritualized. That means simply the tribesmen, they elected their leader and there was no formal ceremony or something to make him the king, or there was no such great fanfare revolving his kinship. Okay, so this was about the early Vedic period. But later Vedic period, now what happened? These villages became towns, towns became cities, and they became big powerful kingdoms. So the Janas now became Mahajanapadas. Okay, so Janas first became Janapada. Janapada was bigger than a Jana, which was bigger than a village. Probably it was a town, but now it was a Mahajanapada. Mahajanapada is like a kingdom. Okay, so the king or the Rajan, slowly his power went on increasing, and then the position of the king became hereditary. Now he was not chosen or elected by the people, whereas a king and then his son, that's how the throne was passed on from the father to the son. And now divine elements were also associated with the king. The king was also considered to be a representative of God, etc. And then Sabha and Samiti lost their importance. So now in the later Vedic period, the king had his own council of ministers. He had lots of people to advise him. So the Sabha and Samiti no longer advised the king. They were there. They were there in existence, not that they went away. But it was there in existence, but they did not advise the king, or they did not have the earlier importance. Now, why the Sabha and Samiti also started being dominated by the rich people? Earlier, we know that the Sabha and Samiti, Sabha consisted of wise elderly people, and Samiti was the entire village. But now Samiti also was not the entire kingdoms, or not all the members of the kingdom. It was a group which is bigger than the Sabha. Sabha was a small group, Samiti was a bigger group. But in both these groups, the rich people became dominating, and they used to take the decisions. And slowly the position of women deteriorated. So the women were not allowed to be part of the Samiti, or they were not allowed to take part in these discussions and voice their opinions. Then the king, a number of rituals and sacrifices were performed to strengthen the position of the king. I can give you an example. In the Ramayana, there is mention about Rama's Rajyabhishek. Now, what is Rajyabhishek? That is anointing him as the king. Rajyabhishek means a ceremony which is performed whereby a person is made the king. Okay, so it is coupled with lots of prayers, lot of havans and yajnas and everything, and then finally, so there is a ritualistic bath. So Abhishek means bath. Abhishek means what do you say? Holy bath is called an Abhishek. So we have seen children even in Harappan civilization that the great bath was used for ceremonial bathing. Something similar. Okay, here also before the king was made the king, he was given a special bath with all sorts of chantings of mantras and other auspicious, things, so that he is purified before he is made to sit on the throne. So, and then there used to be a lot of yajnas, etc., performed to make him the king. And after he becomes the king also, if a particular king becomes very strong and he wants to assert his authority and he wants to send a message to the neighboring kings that he is supreme, then he would conduct the Ashwamedha Yajna. Now, Ashwamedha Yajna was a horse sacrifice. Ashwa means horse. So Ashwamedha Yajna was done. Even in Ramayana, there is a reference of Ashwamedha Yajna. Rama performed this Ashwamedha Yajna. So what happens in Ashwamedha Yajna is a horse is let loose to wander in the neighboring kingdoms, along with maybe certain soldiers who are following the horse. If this horse passes through another kingdom and if it is not stopped by the ruler of that kingdom, if that ruler of that kingdom does not stop the horse, that means that this ruler is accepting the superiority of the king, whose horse is roaming in his kingdom. Okay, so if Rama has sent a horse and if it goes to a neighboring king's kingdom, and if that excuse me, if that neighboring king does not stop the horse, it means that the neighboring king has accepted Rama to be a more powerful king than him, and he is willing to live under the protection of Rama. And if that king is very proud and if he wants, he doesn't want to submit to the authority of Rama, he wants to assert his superiority, then he will stop the horse. And if he stops the horse, it implies that he is challenging Rama for a battle. So whenever the horse goes to any neighboring kingdom where the king stops the horse, that king has to fight a battle with the king who has let the horse loose to roam about or who wishes to perform the Ashwamedha Yajna. Okay? And in this battle, if the first king is able to defeat the second king, only then he can perform the Ashwamedha Yajna. So the horse not only goes to one kingdom, it goes to a number of neighboring kingdoms where it roams, and everywhere either it is it is allowed to freely pass through the kingdom and go ahead, or it is stopped and that particular king has to fight the battle with the king who wants to perform the Ashwamedha Yajna. So after fighting the battles and after winning over all the people who challenged him, or wherever peacefully the horse has passed, those kings have already submitted to his superiority. When this whole exercise is over, the horse returns back to the kingdom. And when the horse comes back to the kingdom, the Ashwamedha Yajna is performed, where a huge gathering is called, where all the sages are invited, all these neighboring kings are invited, and uh, then the yagna is performed where this particular horse is sacrificed. That means it is killed. It is killed and it is given as a sacrifice to gods. So that is Ashwamedha Yajna. And in this yagna, the king is declared to be the supreme ruler of all the kingdoms through which the horse has moved. So that is, the Ashwamedha Yajna. Of course, this was just an information, a very interesting piece of information. Otherwise, you don't have to know the details of Ashwamedha. So all we need to know is, in the early Vedic period, there were Janas. Later Vedic period, it became Janas and Janapadas. The leader was Rajan and the kingship was an elected kingship. Here, kingship was hereditary. Rajan was held by Sabha and Samiti. Sabha and Samiti lost their importance. Sabha was a group of wise leaders. Samiti was a big assembly of people who met on occasions. And Sabha and Samiti here in the later Vedic period were dominated by rich nobles. Women participated in the early Vedic period, whereas women were not allowed to participate in the assemblies in later Vedic. King's position was not ritualized. There were no special rituals or any kind of pujas that were conducted to make him the king. Whereas in the later Vedic period, there were special rituals and sacrifices that were performed to strengthen the position of the king. So we will stop here and then we will continue in our next class.